I know you've done some research on this. What were you able to find out?
Yeah, I mean, it's never a good thing when you quit on your team. Although this is a little bit of a different era, right? I mean, we've seen
Right.
this
Yeah.
gradually over the last several years, going back to Everett Golson. He was at Florida State and then left before the bowl game because he lost his starting job. And you think about through the years now, guys going in the portal late in the season, skipping bowl games. This just takes it to a different level. From what I understand, Thomas Castellanos was not real fired up about Bill O'Brien's offense. It wasn't really a great fit for him. That wasn't certainly they didn't consult him when they were hiring Bill O'Brien, and he stayed and tried to learn it. And I think he wants to be an NFL quarterback, so it seemed like a good opportunity to play for Bill O'Brien. But it very much sounds like Bill O'Brien was trying to force a square peg into a round hole. He wanted him to be a NFL. He wanted to run an NFL offense, and he wanted Castellanos to do that. And so it was a very difficult process getting to that point. Remember when they played Florida State early in the year, and we all just watched in amazement that he never really looked to run till later in the game. And that was by design, and that's kind of what they did the rest of the year. If you look at his numbers, he never really ran the ball this season at Boston College. And I think that was one of the things that frustrated, from what I hear talking to people around the program, Castellanos was very frustrated about that. He wanted to get outside the pocket. He feels like that's where he makes his best plays. He was not comfortable just staying stationary in the pocket and trying to read the field, make NFL run an NFL conceptual offense. And so they had success with him at quarterback. He had 18 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. It's not like he was playing terribly, but he never was really comfortable in it. And from what it sounds like, he was already planning to enter the portal at the end of that season to try to find an offense more suited for him. Then he gets banged up, I guess, in the Syracuse game, then gets benched, and O'Brien basically tells him we're going in a different direction. And at that point, he leaves the team. You can look at that however you want to look at it. Some people are going to say, well, that's ridiculous. You quit on your team. I think other people will say, well, he was going to leave anyway at the end of the season. And so Bill O'Brien just made that answer easier for him. Certainly not defending the decision, but it's not like it's not like everything was fine and he got benched and walked out the door. Like it wasn't a good marriage from the beginning because of how he plays, what he wants to do, and what that offense requires. And then once he wasn't going to play anymore, I think he decided to move on and start looking ahead to his future, from what I was told.
Selfishly, if you're a Florida State fan, look, you hope Castellanos comes in and plays well. One thing I will say, and going back and looking at the numbers and looking at some of how he played last year in that offense that you're talking about, he was forced to improve his accuracy. He ended up completing over 60% of his passes last year. So he had to improve as a thrower, as a passer, and as a reader of defenses. So in a weird way, even though that may not have been an offense best suited for his overall skill set, he had to work on the things that improved him as a quarterback as he enters Florida State. Because now I got to guess he's a better passer now than he was at this time a year ago, because he was forced to do it. He was, like to your point, he ended up having to do that. He cut way back on his turnovers. He only had a total, when you combine a fumble in there, like 6 to 8, I think I remember reading, and he completed over 61% of his passes. So he was improving in areas that he needed to improve, and now he'll go back into an offense that he'd like to run, probably as an improved thrower of the football. I mean, if you're being optimistic, I think that's the way you would look at it.
Yeah, that's definitely what you're hoping. And like you said at the beginning, when you talked about him as a player, if you watch the highlights, you're thinking, oh my gosh, this kid might be Charlie Ward. But you go back to that year after he had that miraculous rally against Florida State, where I think he had over 400 yards of offense in that game. They were down big early and mounted the comeback and probably could have won the game. Just kind of ran out of time. But Castellanos in that game looked incredible in that second half, and as they rallied. But then I watched him later in the year. I was thinking, man, Boston College has a real superstar at quarterback. And then I watched them a couple times later in the year, and I know you did as well. And it's like he looked good for a quarter, then he threw the ball right to the linebacker. He made some just head scratching decisions. It seemed like he was cutting them down some this season, but part of that's probably because the ball wasn't in his hands as much. He wasn't the entire offense. The year before, when he had 15 touchdowns and 14 picks, and so Again, I think when you talk about fits for offenses, I know a lot of Florida State fans would prefer a prototypical quarterback. They want one of these big name, can't miss quarterbacks. A lot of people were sad to see Luke Kromenhoek leave, but I kind of felt like when they hired Gus Malzahn, it seemed like this is kind of the direction they were going to go. And so I think I think Mike Norvell signed up for this when he signed on with Gus Norvell. Excuse me, Gus Malzahn.
Gus Norvell is a good way to call this offense.
The Gus Norvell
offense moving forward. I would say that, and it's not our responsibility to assuage fears of Florida State fans, right? So we're going to say, just as they are, I don't know, maybe it works. Maybe it doesn't. I mean, we don't know at this point. I do know he's better suited to run Gus Malzahn's offense than just about anybody in the portal. So it's not surprising that they would go that route. Now we'll just see, do they get the most out of him? Do they get the best version? Ira, yesterday you were there and were able to ask questions to the new coordinators. I was struck by the overall tone, both by Gus and on the defensive side of the football, where it seems fairly obvious that, I mean, I'm making a judgment call here. Maybe they wouldn't say it this way, but their words certainly suggest that they understand Florida State's got to get tougher. It seems to me like when you talk about toughness and wanting to play a certain way, and then both sides of the ball, both coaches quoted, well, you can't talk about it. You have to be it. You have to do those things in practice. Doesn't that suggest to both of us that we're going to see a different looking practice when we go to watch Florida State play in the spring?
You have to think so, and I think both of us hope so. It's a. And Malzahn was pretty blunt about it yesterday, as you said. He said you can't really want to do that. You can't just talk about it. It's got to be an attitude. It's going to be a mindset of how you approach every day in practice. And I think again, looking at Florida State, especially last season, but even probably the last couple of years, that's not really how they practiced. And it's hard for us to say too much about earlier because it was such a mess. They were trying to put together a roster. They were limited at a lot of positions. They didn't have a lot of depth at a lot of positions. But even in 2023 and then in 2024, obviously, where you're ostensibly further down in the program's development, you would have expected to see some more physicality in practice. And if that's how you're going to practice, that's fine, as long as you can somehow muster it on game day. In 2023, that team still played pretty physical football. 2024 did not at all. So now you say, okay, well, why are we not practicing that way? And yeah, I think there's no question. And for those guys to say it, I'm sure it's partly from them watching film. I mean, they've watched Florida State film now since they've considered this job and taken it. But also, I'm sure when they talk to Mike Norvell, there's no doubt he's telling them that publicly, telling them that in their conversations as well. He never really wanted to talk about it publicly because I don't think he ever wanted to put down his players. But he watched the same games we watched. I mean, that was not a physical football team in any area. And that's got to be a huge priority, and it starts in practice.